Even though Descartes himself wasn't a skeptic, he became the primary source of skeptical debate within the contemporary philosophy. His skeptical method that he uses as a means for the reconstruction of his belief system is an area of intense debate, and in some cases, of the profound insight. In this video, we'll discuss the Cartesian method of doubt and how it leads him to a state of radical skepticism. We'll also discuss two famous ways to respond to Descartes. One is by Moore, that is about changing the starting point of our belief system, beginning not with doubt, but rather with something that can be called common sense. And the other response will be more complex, grounded in Wittgenstein's understanding of the language and of what it means to doubt in the first place. So if you want to learn something about critical discussions behind Descartes' famous text Meditations, this video is for you. Let's start with the doubt. So Descartes makes some introduction into why he thinks it's important to have a firm and a well-grounded belief system. The main reason is that many things that we have learned in life can potentially be false because we rarely question the foundations behind certain beliefs that we acquire. Think about the way you study at school. You have an absolute trust in everything that you learn from a student book, or in the words of a teacher, because for you he is a higher authority. That might seem like the only productive way of learning. On your way to gaining knowledge, you have to accept a lot of different things without questioning them. But for Descartes, this was a big problem. He believed that knowledge must be grounded in absolute truths, not in principles that are contingent upon uncertain or unstable structures. So he starts questioning everything. He begins with questioning claims, then beliefs, then he questions his own sense perception because there are some situations in which our senses can deceive us. His example is how we can see a stick bending in the water when in reality it obviously remains the same. He goes on to questioning his experiences, assuming that he can in fact be asleep when he thinks he is awake, and that all his sensations of shape and color and sounds might in fact be wrong and merely an illusion. And then eventually he questions his own memories and the most obvious forms of understanding, like some mathematical truths that seem to be true and obvious in any of the possible states of mind. So in the end, Descartes concludes that everything might in fact be wrong in case some malevolent demon deceives him constantly when he assumes that he actually knows the thing. This demon might tell him that 2 + 2 is 4 when it is in fact 5. So everything in its very basis might in fact be an illusion. That's what Descartes concludes. What Descartes does next in the state of radical doubt is show that even if everything that we normally believe to be true is false, there is still one thing that we can be certain about. The act of doubting implies the existence of a doubter. So we basically can be sure that in this very moment there is something that is doubting or something that is being deceived by the demon. He calls this something Cogito, which from Latin can be translated as I think. And he concludes his second meditation with the phrase Cogito ergo sum, which is translated as I think, therefore I am. So what Descartes shows in the end of his second meditation is that the only thing that we can know for sure is that we think, and therefore we are thinking things, as he refers to it. And in his further meditations, he reconstructs all of his beliefs based on this fundamental principle. For many people, Descartes' conclusion might seem unsatisfying. I remember when I first read Meditations, I had a very intense feeling of hallucination. I think it is because the text is constructed in a way that you tend to agree with Descartes' assumptions and therefore follow his line of argumentation as he uncovers it. But in the end, you are left with what feels like a complete nonsense. There are several possible explanations for why it happens. Here we'll look at two of them. The first is Moore's response that says that Descartes is wrong when he suggests us to believe that certain most obvious things should be doubted. Moore's famous anti-skeptical argument looks like that. He says, I will demonstrate that the external objects exist by doing the following. I raise one hand and say, here is one hand. I raise another hand and say, here is another hand. By doing so, I demonstrate that at least two external objects existed when I pointed at them. Therefore, external objects exist. So what Moore says here is that Descartes' suggestion to question everything that we believe to be true is wrong. There are just some things that cannot be questioned. So the Cartesian method of doubt collapses in the very beginning. Moore's approach is sometimes called common sense epistemology. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that is concerned with knowledge and the conditions for obtaining it. And since Moore suggests such a straightforward solution to skepticism, his approach might be considered common sense. The second attack on Descartes that I want to discuss comes from Ludwig Wittgenstein. I think that's an interesting one in a sense that it critiques both Descartes and Moore. Wittgenstein contributed to the philosophy of language, and his later concept, language game, serves as a basis for his anti-skeptical argumentation. What Wittgenstein wants to say is that doubting something in the first place means using a particular language in a particular way. What we're interested in here are the situations in which we use particular words. Let's look at the word doubt and pay close attention to how it is normally used. We might say, for example, I doubt that the train will arrive on time. Here we have some ordinary criteria that help us define whether the doubt makes sense. Maybe we check the schedule, heard an announcement about the delay, or know that the weather is bad. In other words, our typical use of I doubt depends on certain contexts and assumptions that we do not question at that moment, like the reliability of schedules, announcements, and our understanding of typical train delays. Wittgenstein's point is that doubt only makes sense in such ordinary language contexts. Doubting that the train will arrive is meaningful because we have the criteria for determining its truth. But doubting that I have hands, for example, as in Descartes' scenario, removes doubt from the context in which it naturally applies, making it nonsensical. We need to have a shared language game where certain background conditions hold and where the participants know how the word doubt is ordinarily used. If, like Descartes, we try to apply the concept of doubt to absolutely everything, insisting that we can doubt even the existence of our own hands, Wittgenstein would argue that we have uprooted the concept of doubt from the contexts that give it meaning. Under normal circumstances, the sentence, I doubt that I have hands, appears nonsensical because there are no usual situations in which we might doubt the existence of our own hands. Doubting it is akin to playing a different game altogether, where the rules of how we use doubt no longer apply. At the same time, Wittgenstein's view also challenges Moore's strategy of proving that the external world exists by saying here is one hand and here is another hand. Moore's proof might look decisive at first, pointing at something as obvious as our own hands to refute skepticism. But for Wittgenstein, it would also be misguided because it treats a basic fact of our language and experience as though it was a proposition up for serious doubt. In everyday life, when we say here is one hand and here is another hand, we're not proving anything. We are simply referring to our body parts in a way that other people would if they were their own. You can also think of an example that Wittgenstein himself gives. Imagine that scientists have discovered a planet Neptune. It would be very strange to assert that since we proved that the planet Neptune exists, we also proved that external objects exist. It's just not what we mean when we're questioning the existence of the external objects. By labeling it as a proof, more misrepresents the nature of non-dubitable facts, facts that ground the possibility of doubt elsewhere. So for Wittgenstein, Descartes' mistake is trying to doubt something outside the normal contexts in which doubt makes sense. Morse's mistake is trying to prove something obvious, like us having hands, as if it were a philosophical argument, while in reality it is just a basic assumption that we share in everyday life. That's all I wanted to say on this topic. I'd like to see your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the skeptical method? Who do you think is right? And do you believe it makes sense to doubt things in general? So if you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching it. See you in the next videos about philosophy.